I always love the transmission of insight, clarity, and it's a kind of synthesis. That's how I experience the work. The various parts are coming together into a whole, and then the sense of the parts being parts kind of dissolves, and you're left with the whole. And my feeling, you can tell me if this is possibly true, is that the aim of this work is, at least one of the aims is, that we learn to be causal. Somehow we're dancing with the causing realms, you've called it. We're engaging with the more than human. And as we do so, we become more human. And this includes the previously more than human qualities and capacities. So you're providing a roadmap, which includes lots of different pathways within it for how we can engage with and perhaps merge with these realms of our extended self. And I would say maybe even our original self. This is me commenting now on more than you've shared, perhaps. And then the integration of the big story culminates and activates the emergence of it culminates the big story we've been living in and activates the emergence of the next big story, the next epoch. So I have a feeling of a kind of tidying up as we understand and sort of viscerally embrace all of these different facets, all of these different traces, currents of existence in their nonlinearity. And yet we may appear to take a linear path as we explore this or that avenue, but then it all gets woven together into something that is exquisitely whole. And clearly it takes not just one weekend, but many weekends to reach the wholeness of the whole that you're unveiling. So one thing that I love about this conversation is you've presented holographically a lot of material in service to what we're coming to next, the 7 lines of inquiry, and then perhaps the 7th theme. So I would love to continue on this journey with you.
Sure. So yes, and yes, and yes to all that you offer there. And yes, it is an astute observation that part of this is an invitation for us to enter and to embrace the causal dimension of our being and our potential. Another way to speak of that is the idea of activating the universal dimension of life. So to the degree that we are looking at the evolutionary story as a planetary human evolving to become a universal life, which is a broad-ranging idea and requires another time to unpack, but it is in that sense that it will naturally lead to, yes, activating the causative causal realms that we are already joined to by birth, but are more perhaps in latency and communicate with us in rare moments, sometime just before we fall asleep, sometime when we wake up in the morning, sometime when we see a beautiful sunset. So those nearby realms that are always there, to embrace them more fully as part of the evolutionary potential, which when the moment you said that, you essentially arced us back to the beginning, the set of questions we decided to skip today, which was expanding the human range. What will involve in this? What must we consider if we are to explore this idea that we are largely dealing with a 10% barrier? Okay, 10% of our DNA potential, 10% of our brain, 10% of, you can look at it in different ways. The human is still held by in the more cultural sense, you'd say, by the conventions and the expectations and the assumptions that hold us back inside a much narrower range than a more fully realized, liberated human scope and range would include and embrace. And often when I say that, something like that, somebody would immediately sense into it in the horizontal liberation, which has its place. I'm proposing there is the vertical and the horizontal and the three-dimensional. Imagine a time where human beings are much more sensitive in the psychic and the clairvoyant sense. There is an interesting conversation that has been around for 2-3 decades, nothing to do with this work, but I think in the 90s they started to talk about indigo children, right? How interesting. So these are examples of some latent knowledge that is indeed dormant with humanity, that there are much greater possibilities and potential that's available for us, which is why we are so captured by athleticism that breaks, the barriers, and extreme sports and people in the arts that do something extraordinary. Why is it? And in a similar way, the sense of searching the beyond through psychedelics. And I am now going to bring myself back in shape because inadvertently I began to talk about the indigo and violet because they are bleeding into whatever it is we're doing right now. But these are some of the elements and the natures that will appear when we talk about the indigo and the violet. So, and it was your lead into the causal realms and your intuition really of where this bigger story is heading to that trigger that. So let me bring back we're skipping this idea of being dialectic. And if later there is a reason to come back to it, we'll come back to it. And we're going to really the last slide, which included this. These are the 7. I don't know why it circled back. Here we go. Here we are. So again, we said that, so what you see here are 7 inquiry lines. The first 5 are arranged by a different model, a different 5-fold structure that actually looks at a pentagrammic system. Pentagrammic is another name to 5-fold, where white represents and is to do with knowledge, and red, and there is a difference between the red in a pentagrammic 5-fold system to red in a 7-fold system. They represent different function. Red often will present the activation or the practical or the practice side, and so on through yellow and green. Blue and yellow and green, I'll address it. And then I just selected 2 other colors for questions 6 and 7. But question 1, which people found themselves engaged in based on passion and interest, was what kinds of knowledge? Recognizing that there are different levels of knowledge. Okay, there is knowledge that is basically information that is useless. And on the continuum from information to transformation, there are different layers or dimensions of knowledge. And so we were asking what kind of knowledge would facilitate the green revitalization that we are intuiting. And then question 2, which was simply framed, what practices and application will encourage a new release of green? The whole range, personal, interpersonal, group practices and applications. I mean, right there is a 3-day seminar if we ever choose to put it in that context. And the third question involved the development and the formation part of our endeavor, and what development work may enable the kind of green rejuvenation and update that we are asserting The fourth question explored sentiments and feelings and appreciations. Very important element in this work, because knowledge without sentiment means nothing. Knowledge with sentiment, with feeling, can mean everything. And it's a bit of a reversing of the order, which will become relevant again when we do a deeper dive into the pathologies of post-everything and post-modernity, as to why the how I feel in this moment became the governing criterion by which we measure truth. I feel something, so that becomes the truth, which is partly the reason we introduced question 7. Question 5 included a focus on the connections and specifically on the more than human realms. What realms of potential, what realms of energy, what connective realms can inspire new green possibilities and evolution? And a very interesting inquiry that attracted many people was exploring all the different facets of the new green art that will revitalize and help update the human possibility and its range. And that 7th inquiry focused on sentiments and practices that will specifically rekindle the quality of chivalry, of honor, of respect, of reverence, the other human virtues. What is their place, if they have a place, in this irreverent time? So before I do a deeper dive into this question, because that then became a question that surfaced in the larger forum, anything that, or shall I bring back the slide to give you a chance to react to it altogether?
I love every single one of these questions. And of course, I wanted to hear, well, what are the kinds of knowledge? What are the practices and applications? And like you said, that would be a long and wonderful conversation. In relation to the new green art, what flashed for me is a friend and client, actually, who is creating gardens for good. That's actually the name of his company. And his designs are unbelievable. And they're absolutely bringing nature and the built environment together in incredibly creative, even maybe unheralded ways. So that came to me as an example. So it's very alive, and it's life itself that's just oozing through all of these organic and seemingly inorganic structures that are being assembled. I could give one example, which is a chair that looks like a fern, and it's a built object, and yet it beautifully reflects life as it has evolved. So that feels like a great synthesis. So my comment really is to provide an example that for some reason is really alive for me as I see these questions.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example. And the point is not that we are asserting that we are in a place to teach anybody about that, about all those 7s. What we are asserting is that if humanity is to rebirth itself, regenerate itself, these kind of questions will be asked by, not just by people who are in the current institutions of knowledge, not just by the people who are currently the recognized names in the various fields of arts, but by new emergent entrance into any spaces, and where different people can imagine and explore and research. These are more about the invitation to the live exploration and the workshopping of those inquiries than one side teaching another side. I imagine that as part of our endeavor here in what we call portals of perception, I could imagine these 7 endeavor lines and many more gathering people of shared interest who are developing their work and wanting to propagate new ideas and explore with others and give expression and test new ideas and produce drafts and new drafts and more drafts. Why? Because humanity needs this kind of application at this time. There is a lot to be said, Jeff, about attending to all the crisis points on the planet. Tremendous service and dedication of many wonderful people who are attending to this, especially still at these times when we are still so heavily influenced by the pandemic. I deeply believe that alongside attending to all the crisis points and the points of challenge, which, we reflected in the part we skipped a little bit, which often are to do with how much we become dialectic upon the red and orange influences, because they are actually feeding many of those crisis points. Yes, and with that, there is a place and time for those people that are prepared to engage with the what next. And it's not an either or. It's not that one thing needs to be done before the other, or that is the only way to approach it. We need all the possible approaches. We need them concurrently. We need them generated all at the same time by passion, by interest, by talent, by opportunity, by response to a need.